She was the royal who stayed out of scandal, the princess who chose love over legacy. But when shocking images of Jack Brooksbank, her husband, surfaced from a yacht in Capri, everything changed. Princess Eugenie's carefully built world crumbled in real time, and behind palace doors, she was left in tears. The man she trusted, the life she protected, and the privacy she fought for had all been shattered in a single weekend. As headlines exploded and whispers grew louder, one heartbreaking question remained. Was it just a mistake, or a betrayal that could end a royal love story for good? A royal romance once sealed in trust. When Princess Eugenie married Jack Brooksbank in 2018, it wasn't just another royal wedding. It was a love story the public actually believed in. Unlike unions bound by protocol or burdened with public duty, theirs felt different. Genuine, simple, honest. It wasn't arranged by royal advisors or guided by tradition. It was rooted in choice. They met in 2010 during a ski trip in Verbier, Switzerland, and sparks quietly flew. He was a bartender turned brand ambassador. She was a princess who didn't want to be treated like one. Their connection wasn't glamorous, but it was real. Over the next few years, they navigated long distance, career shifts, and royal attention, all while staying grounded. And when they married at St. George's Chapel in Windsor, the celebration felt almost intimate. Not about the monarchy, but about them. Eugenie was often praised for her decision. Jack wasn't a titled aristocrat or a global celebrity. He was, by all appearances, a humble, kind-hearted man with no ego and deep affection for her. The kind of love story that the monarchy desperately needed. One not built on obligation, but on compatibility and respect. As time went on, their lives took on a quiet rhythm. They moved to a cottage in the grounds of Kensington Palace, then later to Frogmore Cottage, where they raised their son, August, out of the public spotlight. Their appearances together were limited but warm, always marked by affectionate glances and subtle smiles. Royal watchers called them the normal royals, a modern couple untouched by drama. But behind every fairy tale is a shadow. And by 2020, that shadow began to creep in. First cracks behind closed doors. It began with distance. Jack's new role in the high-end tequila industry placed him in elite circles, surrounded by celebrities, models, and marketing executives. While Eugenie focused on motherhood and charitable work in the UK, Jack was spotted increasingly at global events, luxury launches, rooftop gatherings, and yacht weekends that began raising eyebrows. At first, the couple dismissed it as career evolution. But insiders noted the growing imbalance. Jack was flying frequently, attending parties where phones weren't always welcome, while Eugenie was left managing royal duties, family pressures, and motherhood alone. Friends began to whisper. Were they just growing apart? Or was something else happening behind the scenes? Then came the photos, paparazzi images of Jack on a yacht in the Mediterranean, shirtless, champagne in hand, surrounded by bikini-clad women. One in particular was seen whispering into his ear, laughing, leaning just a little too close. The images quickly went viral. Headlines screamed betrayal. Social media speculated wildly. The man once seen as loyal and down-to-earth now looked careless, even disrespectful. Eugenie stayed silent. There were no press statements, no interviews, no emotional public displays. But behind closed doors, sources said the toll was clear. She looked visibly strained, one palace insider shared. The smiles stopped reaching her eyes. Public appearances with Jack began to dwindle. Where they once attended events side by side, Eugenie was now seen alone. Sometimes with her sister Beatrice, sometimes with her mother, but never with Jack. The distance was no longer subtle. It was visible, palpable. The royal romance that once symbolized quiet strength was starting to unravel. And the pain wasn't just personal. It was becoming painfully, inescapably public. The boat scandal that shocked the palace, the images were impossible to ignore. In the summer of 2021, Jack Brooksbank was photographed on a luxury yacht off the coast of Capri, shirtless, smiling, and surrounded by 3 glamorous women, none of whom were his wife. One woman lounged beside him in a red bikini. Another draped herself casually across his shoulders. In his hand, a champagne flute. And on his face, the kind of relaxed expression that looked alarmingly out of place for a man married to a royal. British tabloids erupted. The headlines were brutal. Eugenie's husband caught in yacht scandal, one read. Others were less polite. The press dissected every image, every touch, every expression. The fact that Eugenie was back in Windsor caring for their infant son made the scandal feel even worse. The timing, the optics, it all suggested betrayal. Palace aides were caught off guard. There had been no warning, no internal crisis talks, no spin prepared. Within hours, the scandal was everywhere, from UK breakfast shows to late-night American talk shows. The name Jack Brooksbank had gone from unknown to infamous. Inside the palace, the reaction was swift and silent. Damage control began immediately. But behind the polished statements and PR shields, there was one person caught in the center. Princess Eugenie. Sources close to her said she was composed in public, but devastated in private. One friend described it more bluntly. She was blindsided, humiliated. This wasn't just about what happened, it was about how publicly it happened. Eugenie had spent years carefully managing her image, balancing royal obligations with a desire for a quiet, scandal-free life. Now, with a single afternoon's headlines, all of that work felt undone. Behind palace doors, her heartbreak was reportedly visible. And while she kept up appearances for the sake of the institution, her silence said everything. The fairy tale was cracking, and the entire world had a front-row seat. Cambridge and Sussex reactions. The fallout from the scandal didn't stay within Eugenie's marriage. It rippled through the entire royal family. And in a palace where optics are everything, Jack's behavior presented a problem far beyond gossip. It became a matter of reputation, one the firm couldn't afford to ignore. Prince William and Catherine reportedly took immediate steps to distance themselves. They offered no public comment, but insiders say they pulled back from any shared appearances or press moments that might link them to the controversy. They wanted to protect the institution, one source said. This wasn't just about Eugenie. It was about shielding the monarchy. But not everyone retreated. Prince Harry, long known to be closest to Eugenie among all his cousins, was said to be furious, not with Jack, but with the media frenzy that followed. Living in Montecito, Harry reportedly called Eugenie privately, offering emotional support and advice from a distance. Meghan, too, allegedly reached out, urging her to prioritize privacy, not headlines. Inside the family, tension quietly mounted. Some questioned how Jack could allow this to happen. Others feared what it would mean for public trust in the younger generation of royals. The scandal wasn't just tabloid fodder. It was a test of loyalty, unity, and modern expectations of royal spouses. Behind the scenes, palace officials worked to control the narrative. Efforts were made to shift attention to other events, other family members, anything that could draw focus away from the Capri debacle. But for Eugenie, there was no hiding. The images were etched into the public's memory, and her personal pain had become part of a national conversation. Even within her own family, there were conflicting responses. Some urged discretion, others pushed for a statement. But through it all, Eugenie remained silent, not out of weakness but resolve. She wasn't ready to speak, not yet. And in the silence, one truth became clear. This wasn't just a marriage crisis. It was a royal reckoning. Eugenie's emotional breakdown. For weeks, Princess Eugenie maintained a public silence. She smiled at charity events, nodded politely at cameras, and held her son close during family appearances. But behind the scenes, the pressure was building. And finally, it broke. According to palace insiders, Eugenie broke down during a private meeting with senior aides at Royal Lodge. It wasn't a dramatic outburst. There were no screaming matches or thrown objects, just tears, quiet, painful, and uncontrollable. For a woman known for her composure and warmth, it was a moment that shook those around her. She trusted him, one aide reportedly said. She believed she had something most royals didn't, a love based on choice, not status. And now, it felt like it had all unraveled. The betrayal wasn't just personal. It was public. That was the part she couldn't escape. If this had happened behind closed doors, perhaps it could have been managed, maybe even forgiven. But the photos, the headlines, the endless commentary, they made it impossible to pretend the trust hadn't been broken. Sources close to her said it wasn't just the act. It was the exposure, the embarrassment, the idea that while she was home with their son, Jack had placed himself at the center of a media storm and didn't see it coming. That level of recklessness, as one friend put it, cut deeper than any rumor ever could. Those present in the room described Eugenie as devastated, not because she couldn't handle hardship, but because she never expected her life to become a royal scandal. She had spent her entire public career avoiding controversy, protecting her privacy, and carving out a path rooted in dignity. Now that image had been pierced, and she had to decide what came next. Her tears weren't weakness. They were the painful acknowledgement that her marriage, her family, and her peace had all been put at risk by someone she loved. Secrets behind Eugenie's smile. In the weeks following the scandal, Princess Eugenie returned to the public eye with remarkable grace. She resumed her charity work, gave speeches, and even walked red carpets. But to those watching closely, something had shifted. Her outfits grew bolder, her colors darker, her expressions more focused, less carefree. Gone were the soft pastels and romantic silhouettes she once favored, replaced by striking blacks, structured coats, and sharp heels. It was subtle, but clear. She was no longer playing the role of the sweet, background royal. She was stepping forward, not as a wife, but as a woman reclaiming herself. And yet, she said nothing. Not a single interview, not one social media post addressing the scandal. Her silence became her power. Royal watchers and fashion critics alike began commenting on her calm defiance. She didn't need to explain herself. The world had seen enough, and she had nothing to prove. Friends close to her say she channeled her hurt into her work. Her appearances at anti-trafficking forums and environmental initiatives became more frequent, more impassioned. Her speeches took on sharper edges. She spoke of resilience, of protecting future generations, of strength in quiet moments. She never mentioned her personal life, but the message was there. And still, Jack was noticeably absent. The woman once defined by her love story was now being seen in a new light. Not as a heartbroken princess, but as a modern royal standing tall in the face of personal pain. It wasn't just a change in mood, it was a shift in identity. Behind every public smile, there was still heartbreak. But there was also clarity, resolve, and strength. Princess Eugenie was no longer shielding the truth. She was walking through it, with grace, silence, unmistakable control. A family divided. As the scandal deepened, so did the divisions within the York family. What had once been a private marital issue now hovered over every royal gathering, and everyone had an opinion. For Princess Eugenie, the fallout wasn't just about Jack's betrayal. It was about navigating loyalty, reputation, and the deeply fractured landscape of her own family. Sarah Ferguson, Eugenie's mother, was said to be the first to step in. Fiercely protective of her daughters and no stranger to scandal herself, Fergie reportedly urged Eugenie to hold her ground but keep her heart open. She had once endured public humiliation, and she didn't want her daughter to crumble under the same weight. Her advice was clear. If the love was real, don't let headlines destroy it. Prince Andrew, embroiled in his own controversies and keeping a low profile, offered no public comments. But his silence spoke volumes. Some interpreted it as indifference. Others said he was trying to avoid fueling more attention. Regardless, Eugenie was left to navigate the mess without her father's visible support. The person who stood closest to her was her sister, Princess Beatrice. She was seen repeatedly by Eugenie's side during public events in the weeks following the scandal. Whether it was a quiet smile at a charity gala or a hand on her back as they exited an event, Beatrice became her emotional anchor. "They're more like best friends than sisters," one royal source noted, and in this moment, that bond mattered more than ever. Within the broader royal circle, responses were mixed. Some felt it was best for Eugenie to forgive and rebuild. Others feared the scandal would continue to haunt the family's already fragile public standing. Even royal cousins were reportedly conflicted, caught between personal sympathy and institutional preservation. Behind closed doors, the pressure mounted. Public attention had quieted slightly, but the emotional fallout remained raw. The palace wanted control. Eugenie wanted peace. And the two didn't always align. Inside the York family, old wounds reopened. Whispers about past indiscretions. Unspoken resentment. It wasn't just one marriage that felt unsteady. It was the foundation beneath the entire branch of the royal tree. And Eugenie, she stood in the middle of it all, torn between healing her private life and protecting her public one. Jack's public apology, too little, too late. Weeks after the scandal broke, Jack Brooksbank finally broke his. Silence. But instead of a heartfelt confession or a sincere public apology, he released a brief statement through a friend. The photos were misleading and unfortunate. That was it. For many watching, especially those who had once admired the couple's grounded love, the response felt vague, evasive, and deeply disappointing. There was no acknowledgement of how it made Eugenie feel, no apology to her, no visible effort to take responsibility, just a weak attempt at reframing a very public betrayal as a misunderstanding. Inside the palace, the statement landed poorly. Royal aides had reportedly urged Jack to stay quiet or go all in, not somewhere in between. But he chose the middle ground, and in doing so, made things worse. It wasn't the mistake that broke her trust, one source close to Eugenie said. It was the way he tried to deny it mattered. Eugenie, by then, had returned to her duties. She showed up at a children's hospital days later, smiling warmly, speaking gently, and refusing to flinch in front of photographers. But friends said she was struggling behind the scenes. She felt betrayed twice. A longtime friend revealed, once by what he did, and once by how he handled it. The apology, if it could be called that, didn't open a door to reconciliation. If anything, it closed one. The marriage wasn't over, but it was wounded, deeply. And this time, it wasn't just about rumors or photos, it was about trust. The foundation of everything they'd built over a decade, and how quickly it had cracked. Publicly, Eugenie made no comment. She didn't fire back. She didn't defend him either. Her silence became louder than any response Jack could offer. For the press, the story was winding down. For Eugenie, it was just beginning. Could she forgive this? Or would she walk away from the life she'd worked so hard to protect? That question now hung in the air, not just for her, but for every royal watcher around the world. And all eyes remained on the princess, whose love story had once seemed so unbreakable, until it broke. Will Eugenie forgive or walk away? As the dust settled around the scandal, one question loomed over every royal briefing, every headline, and every whisper inside palace corridors. Would Princess Eugenie forgive Jack? Or would she leave him? For months, she offered no answer, no clues. Just the same calm expression, the same poised posture, the same dignified silence that had come to define her public image. But behind that silence, there was a storm. Eugenie had never asked to be a spotlight royal. She didn't chase the front pages. She didn't trade in royal mystique or family drama. She had crafted a life carefully, balancing the weight of her name with a desire for something simpler. A loving home, a peaceful marriage, a quiet place to raise her son, August. But when that quiet world was shattered, not by whispers but by headlines and photographs, everything changed. Inside that palace bubble, the pain cut differently. It wasn't just about what Jack had done, or hadn't done. It was about how carelessly it had all unfolded. He had stepped out of their shared world and into the arms of chaos, and left her to carry the shame alone. Even if the betrayal was emotional rather than physical, the damage was real. The optics were undeniable, and the sense of humiliation lingered in every room she entered. Every headline she couldn't avoid. Sources close to Eugenie described her as visibly wounded, but incredibly composed. She didn't lash out. She didn't beg for sympathy. But she also didn't brush it off. Behind closed doors, she was asking the one question no royal training prepares you for. Can love survive public betrayal? The answer didn't come easy. On one side of the scale was August, her son, her purpose, the little boy she had sworn to protect at all costs. On the other was trust, cracked, bruised, and more fragile than ever. Friends revealed she had turned inward, leaning on therapy, spiritual retreats, long conversations with confidants who had no ties to the crown. She wasn't seeking PR advice, she was seeking truth. Inside the palace, speculation became strategy. Some aides quietly mapped out options for a trial separation, a way to give space without drawing more attention. Others pushed her toward forgiveness, reminding her of the royal tradition. Endure, adapt, keep the family name intact. But Eugenie had never been one to follow the script blindly. She wasn't bound by the same expectations as others. She had always chosen her own path, And so, the world watched. Not for a headline, not for a staged reconciliation, but for a subtle shift in energy. Would Jack reappear by her side? Would she post a photo? Wear her ring more prominently? Offer a sign? Or would she step forward alone? A woman choosing. Strength over storyline. By year's end, the answer became clearer. Eugenie wasn't rushing to forget, and she wasn't ready to forgive. But she also wasn't collapsing under the weight of betrayal. Her silence, once seen as shielding, had become something more powerful. A statement. It said she was thinking, processing, choosing herself before choosing anyone else. She may still wear the title of princess, but in this next chapter, she would be the one writing the rules. A Princess Reborn. Months after the scandal, Princess Eugenie emerged, not just as a royal wife or daughter, but as a woman who had survived heartbreak and found her own footing again. The world expected her to return quietly, perhaps subdued or forever guarded, but what they saw instead was something stronger, more defined. She expanded her nonprofit work, launching new initiatives around modern slavery awareness and environmental change. She began speaking more openly about mental health, though she still avoided discussing her private life. Her tone sharpened. Her gaze steadied. The softness remained, but it no longer concealed uncertainty. In a move that surprised many, Eugenie temporarily relocated to Portugal with her family, seeking privacy, distance, and space to reset. It wasn't exile, it was evolution. Away from palace walls and tabloid frenzy, she began to rebuild her sense of self on her own terms. Public appearances became fewer, but more deliberate. She attended events solo. She stood taller. Even her style changed, less romantic, more commanding. The girl who once blushed in front of cameras now walked into rooms like she owned them. Jack, for his part, remained present, but subdued. He appeared at a few family gatherings, but rarely beside her in public. There was no formal separation, no dramatic statements, just distance. And in that space, Eugenie was becoming someone new. The tears she had once shed behind palace doors had dried, not because the pain had vanished, but because she had learned how to carry it. And in doing so, she no longer looked like a woman betrayed. She looked like a woman who had grown past the need to be rescued. Her love story had changed. So had she. And in the process, she discovered something no scandal could take from her. Her voice, her resilience, and her quiet, undeniable strength. Princess Eugenie had entered the storm as a wife in crisis. She stepped out of it as a royal woman reborn. She didn't fight for pity. She fought for clarity. In the end, Princess Eugenie didn't break. She transformed. What began in heartbreak now stands as a quiet reminder that even royal hearts bleed, and even royal women rise. Her tears told a story. Her strength is now rewriting the ending.